can you say in French, I was preparing them? Imagine you are in a conversation and you need to say it in French. So on the moment, right now, can you say in French, I was preparing them? If you felt a freeze, that's your brain searching for a skill it was never trained to use. Because that sentence uses structure that work completely differently in French. And no course ever trained you to build them in real time. So I'm going to train you. And by the end of this video, you will build that sentence yourself, under time pressure and many others as well. But there is one rule you need to follow. Say every sentence out loud. Because your brain learns by doing, not by watching. And this is your training session. If you just watch, you're doing exactly what every other course taught you. Consuming passively. But here this is different. You produce. So now let's build this step by step. If you already know the imparfait and how to deal with it and them in sentences like I was preparing it or I was preparing them, you can skip to the core training of this video with the time codes, to the speed trainings that build your French reflexes and improve your confidence in French. Otherwise, let's say in French, I was preparing. So to say I was preparing, we need the verb for to prepare. How to say to prepare in French? To prepare is préparer. Préparer. So that's an ER verb that ends with the sound E. Now to say I was preparing, what's really important to know is that the was preparing, this structure was plus the verb that ends with ing, this structure is always the imparfait in French. And to make the imparfait, you take the verb in the infinitive form and you replace the ending by the sound E. That you write AI, but that sounds E. So here we have préparer in the imparfait, which sounds exactly as with the infinitive. There's also a silent ending, but here, as it's a spoken French course, we don't focus on it. So just préparer. So now that you know that, how do you say just I was preparing? Je préparais. And that's it. Just one verb. Here what's really important is that you focus on the idea that you mean. And here the idea that you mean with was preparing is the idea of preparing. Not the verb to be, not the idea of to be, but the idea of preparing. So you need the verb to prepare in French only. Just préparer in the imparfait. So je préparais. Now let's say we were carrying. So here we need the idea of to carry. To carry in French is porter. Porter. Which is also an ER verb. So to say it in the imparfait, it sounds the same as with the infinitive form. So now let's say we were carrying with the casual we. In French, in spoken French, to say we, you always say on. You don't say nous, that sounds too formal. To say we, in 99% of cases, you say on. And then to say we were carrying, the were carrying is the same principle. You only need the idea of carrying, not the idea of to be. So how do you think you should say we were carrying? On portait. So same principle with the idea of carrying only, no verb to be. So on portait. Now let's say you were. Just you were. So this time we only have the verb to be. So this time we're going to say the verb to be in the imparfait. And the imparfait is always the same. First you need the infinitive. So how do you say the infinitive to be in French? To be in French in the infinitive is être. Just être. And when you want to say it in the imparfait, you replace the ending by et, which makes était. Était. So how do you say you informal were? Tu étais. And that's it. So there's no surprise. With the imparfait, the ending is et. Était, tu étais. Because here you really mean the verb to be. So tu étais. Now let's add some pronouns. Let's say I was carrying it. So here what's really important to know is that the it doesn't exist in French. But of course, you can express the idea of it in French. So how to do that? It always represents something. Here, let's assume that the it represents a feminine thing. So I'm going to say it feminine. So for instance, like a box. You could say in English, I was carrying the box. And then in the conversation, when the context is clear, you don't repeat the box, you just say it. So you say, I was carrying it. So in French, you say the box, you say la boîte. And then to say the it in French, you take the French the. Here, the French the is la. Because it represents the box, la boîte. So here the it is la. And that's it. Then where do you place that it, that la? In French, the it always goes before the verb. Always, that never changes. So here the it feminine is la before the verb. And then when you say I was carrying it, the was carrying doesn't change. It's always the imparfait. So how do you say I was carrying it? Je la portais. And that's it. So the it feminine is la before the verb, and was carrying is the idea of carrying in the imparfait, so porter in the imparfait, so with la before the verb, which makes je la portais. Then let's say you were preparing it, feminine. So that's the same principle, with the it feminine, which is la before the verb, and the was preparing is always the imparfait. So how do you think you should say? You informal were preparing it. Tu l'as préparé. So it's very important to focus on the ideas that you mean. So the idea of it feminine, la before the verb, and the idea of were preparing, which is the idea of preparing, so préparer. Tu l'as préparé. Now let's say she was sure. So first we need to say sure in French. That's almost the same in French. To say sure, you say sûr. Just sûr. So now how do you say she was sure? You always need to focus on the ideas that you mean. Here when you say she was sure, there's only one verb, the verb to be. So here you really mean the verb for to be. So you have to say the verb for to be in French in the imparfait. So how do you say in French, she was sure? Elle était sûre. And that's it. There's no trap. Here it's the same order in English and in French, with the idea of to be in the past, in the imparfait, and then sûre. Elle était sûre. Now let's say I was sure. How do you think you should say I was sure? J'étais sûr. Same principle with a little subtlety. Here the je of I turns into J plus apostrophe because just after there's a word that starts with a vowel. So in this case, when after je, directly after je, you have a vowel, the je turns into J apostrophe. So j'étais sûr. Now let's say you were preparing them. So here there's something new. There's the them. But if you think about it, them is just the plural of it. It's like when you say you were preparing the boxes. You can say it once and then you don't repeat the boxes. You just say them. You were preparing them. So the boxes is les boîtes. So you still need the French the, but here it's the French plural the, which is les. So them is les. And then it works the same. The them, les, always goes before the verb. So how do you think you should say you informal were preparing them? Tu les préparais. And that's it. The idea of them, les, before the verb, and then the idea of preparing only in the imparfait. So, tu les préparais. Then can you say, we were carrying them? There's no trap. That's still the same principle. How do you say, we were carrying them? On les portait. So with on, that is the casual we, then the idea of them before the verb, and then the idea of were carrying, porter in the imparfait. So on les portait. And now we're going to do a series of 10 sentences in a row, like we just did. So I'm going to say English sentences, like she was sure or I was preparing it feminine, but after each sentence that I say in English, you say it in French. Then I say it in French, and then I say directly the next one in English. So it's really important that you focus on the ideas that you mean. It's really a matter of focusing here. Sometimes you need to say the idea of to be in French because you really mean to be in the past, but sometimes even if in English there is the verb to be, but in was preparing or were carrying, you don't mean the idea of to be, you mean the idea of preparing or carrying. So you don't say the verb to be, but the verb that you mean. That's the most important. If you miss one sentence, that's okay, that's fine. And when I say the next one, focus on the next one. So let's do this first series. Get ready. 3, 2, 1. How do you say? He was preparing it féminine. Il l'a préparé. I was carrying them. Je l'ai porté. You informal were carrying it féminine. Tu l'as porté. I was sure. J'étais sûr. You informal were sure. Tu étais sûr. We were preparing it féminine. On l'a préparé. I was preparing them. Je l'ai préparé. We were sure. On était sûr. She was carrying it féminine. Elle l'a porté. I was sure. J'étais sûr. And that's it. Congratulations. Nice work. You just built French sentences with the imparfait and with object pronouns, it and them, under time pressure, and without a grammar table. And that's great. And that's how you get to think in French instinctively. If you want more of this, I have a free 4-hour masterclass with this kind of speed practice and also with slower practice to learn the building blocks for real French conversations. But for the moment, let's push further. Now let's ask questions. Questions with why. How to say why in French. Why is pourquoi. Just pourquoi. So now you're going to ask, why was he sure? So to ask questions in French, that's really easy. You just say the question word, you start with why, pourquoi, and then you say he was sure. Just why, and then the regular statement. He was sure. Why he was sure. So how do you think you should say in French, why was he sure? Pourquoi il était sûr? So here, no surprise, no trap, just the question word, why, pourquoi, and then he was sure with the idea of to be, because here you really mean to be in he was sure. It's the idea of being sure in the past, in the imparfait, so pourquoi il était sûr? Then can you ask, why was he carrying them? So again, there is no trap, it's always the same. You just say why, the question word, and then the regular statement, he was carrying them. So how do you ask in French? Why was he carrying them? Pourquoi il les portait? And that's it. So just why, pourquoi, and then you know how to say he was carrying them with the idea of them, les, before the verb, and then the idea of was carrying, that is the idea of carry in the past. So, pourquoi il les portait? Then let's say the negation in French. Let's say, I was not sure. To say the not, to say the negation in French, the idea of the negation, you say pas. So just pas that you place just after the verb, directly after the verb. So how do you think you should say, I was not sure? J'étais pas sûr. And that's it. There is no ne in spoken French for the negation. Just pas, just after the verb, directly after the verb. So, j'étais pas sûr. Then let's say, I was not preparing it feminine. So really focus on what you have to say. It's very logical. You know everything you need to say this sentence, but you really need to focus on what you mean. So here we have a negation, so pas, just after the verb. So how do you say in French? I was not preparing it feminine. Je la préparais pas. So actually that's very logical because the it feminine la is before the verb. Then you say the verb and then you say pas at the end. So je la préparais pas. Then let's ask another question. How do you ask? Why was she carrying them? Again, there's no trap. You know how to say it. So how do you say, why was she carrying them? Pourquoi elle les portait? So with why, pourquoi, and then the regular statement, she was carrying them. Elle les portait. Pourquoi elle les portait? So now let's do our second series. So as we did before, it's a series of 10 sentences that I'm going to say in English. So sentences like we just did, and then sometimes with a question, sometimes with a negation. So let's do it. Get ready. 3, 2, 1. How do you say? I was preparing it féminine. Je la préparais. Why was he carrying it féminine? Pourquoi il l'a porté? You informal were not preparing them. Tu les préparais pas. You informal were sure. Tu étais sûr. Why were you informal sure? Pourquoi tu étais sûr? We were not preparing them. On les préparait pas. Why was she carrying them? Pourquoi elle les portait? I wasn't sure. J'étais pas sûr. Why was he carrying them? Pourquoi il les portait? She was sure. Elle était sûre. And that's it. And do you remember when you tried to say I was preparing them at the beginning of the video? It was not so easy. And then you just built it. And a dozen more like it. And not by memorizing a rule. You just thought in French ideas. And it came out. That's what it feels like. And that's the practice that was always missing. Apps teach recognition. Classes teach grammar rules. But nobody trained you to actually produce French sentences in real time. That's why you keep freezing. Not because something is wrong with you, but because you were never trained for this. So to go further, you can join my free 4-hour masterclass. That covers the building blocks you need for real French conversation. With a method just designed to make you speak French with confidence. While you build sentences yourself. Slowly first, then you drill them until it's automatic. The link is in the description. Don't keep studying French the way you've been studying and keep freezing every time you try to speak French. You can train your French speaking with the right method and get your brain to think in French now. I see you in the masterclass.